right, so today we're going to dive into European politics. We're looking at Stare Lumi. It's a Romanian podcast.
Hey, cool.
It means the state of the world. And we'll be hearing from Varlaam Schimnicul. He's the co-founder of this platform called duhovnik.ro.
Okay.
And historian Marius Porifogenetul.
So what are they looking at? What's the big question?
Well, they're really dissecting this question of, is the world tilting towards the right?
Oh, wow.
Why should we care?
Yeah, why should we care?
Well, because political shifts in one part of the world really impact everyone. It could be economics, alliances, even just like what you see on your news feed.
Absolutely.
So they kick things off with these German elections. You might have seen that the Christian Democrat candidate, Friedrich Merz, is likely to win. But what's really interesting is that the far-right Alliance for Germany party got second place. So Schimnicul and Porifogenetul are really digging into that. They're asking, is this just a blip, or is this a sign of something much bigger?
That's a big question.
Yeah, and to really understand what might be fueling this shift, they talk about what they call these successive crises. So we've had economic downturns, the pandemic, now the war in Ukraine.
Right.
Each one of these has kind of created these shock waves.
Yeah.
So they say that being in this constant state of upheaval makes people crave stability.
Oh, I see.
Strong leadership, simple solutions.
Right.
Which unfortunately can sometimes make it easier for extreme ideologies to take root.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's not just about fear and instability. They also talk about the issue of inequality. Schimnicul and Porifogenetul point out that when there are growing disparities in wealth and opportunity,
yeah,
it makes people resentful. Like the system is rigged against them.
Right.
And when people feel like traditional ways to change things aren't working, they're more likely to look to these radical solutions.
Makes sense.
Even the ones that are offered by the far right.
Absolutely.
Then there's this whole social media factor.
Oh, yeah.
I know we hear about this all the time.
Right.
But they talk about how algorithms and echo chambers can actually amplify that polarization. So it's like social media is custom tailoring our reality to confirm our existing biases.
Wow.
Which makes it harder to bridge the gap between people who think differently.
Yeah, like we're all just stuck in our own little worlds.
Right. It's like we're living in these little information bubbles, completely cut off from anyone who disagrees with us.
Totally.
So if social media is making it harder to find common ground, what role do traditional political parties even have in this?
I wonder.
That's another question they ask. They ask if established political parties have failed to address the concerns of everyday people.
Yeah, are they even listening?
And if mainstream parties aren't offering solutions that resonate with people,
right,
are people turning to the right out of desperation?
Interesting.
These are big questions.
Yeah, and uncomfortable ones.
But Schimnicul and Porifogenetul say we can't ignore them.
I agree.
And this brings us to something that's really sensitive and often misunderstood, this idea of demographic and cultural anxiety. Okay. So they're suggesting that for some people, these rapid changes in society, whether it's increased immigration or evolving cultural norms,
right,
it creates this unease, this longing for a simpler time, a more familiar past.
I see.
And unfortunately, that longing can sometimes be manipulated by groups promoting exclusionary and nationalist views.
Right. It's really complex.
Yeah. And it's crucial to understand that Schimnicul and Porifogenetul aren't endorsing any particular viewpoint.
Okay.
They're just presenting a range of factors that might be contributing to this shift to the right.
So they're encouraging us to think critically.
Right. They want us to look beyond the headlines. Try to understand why these political trends are happening.
That's important.
And to illustrate how powerful these trends can be. They use the example of Brexit.
Oh, yeah.
Remember all the chaos and division?
Oh, yeah.
They argue that Brexit is a prime example of how Euroscepticism and rising nationalism can have real-world consequences.
For sure.
It fractured the UK, impacted its economy, changed its relationships on the global stage.
Yeah.
It's a stark reminder that these aren't just abstract ideas. They have the potential to reshake entire nations.
Absolutely.
And that brings us to this really fascinating question. What are the geopolitical implications of all of this?
Right. What happens if this keeps going?
What happens if this rightward shift keeps gaining momentum in Europe?
Yeah.
This is where things get really interesting. Like something out of a Cold War spy movie.
Oh, wow.
Schimnicul and Porifogenetul suggest that these internal divisions and anxieties within Europe could be creating an opening.
An opening for what?
A vulnerability that countries like Russia and China could exploit to advance their own agendas.
Oh, wow.
So if Europe seems fractured, how will that impact its global standing? Will it be able to act as a united force on the world stage?
It's kind of scary to think about.
Yeah, It makes me a little nervous.
Me too.
And remember, Russia is still finding ways to stay afloat,
Right.
possibly with some help from China.
Yeah.
So while Europe is dealing with all these internal challenges, it might be struggling to respond effectively to these changing power dynamics.
Yeah.
This is where the conversation really gets serious.
Yeah, the stakes are high.
Okay, so we've got a potentially fractured Europe facing off against these assertive global players. What's next?
I don't know.
Well, this is where Schimnicul and Porifogenetul bring the conversation back to Romania.
Okay.
And let me tell you, it's wild.
Oh, really?
They start by talking about this guy, Kellen Georgescu. They describe him as a populist candidate with possible ties to Russia.
Interesting.
And it's not just the Russia thing.
Right.
There were these allegations of undeclared campaign funds. And then the second round of the election, the one where he was a contender, it got annulled.
Wow, so much drama.
It's like something out of a movie.
I know.
But you know what I find fascinating is why he's so popular. It seems like he really connected with people.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So Schimnicul and Porifogenetul try to get into that. They say one reason is this disillusionment with the system. People are just tired of the same old stuff.
Right, like the same old faces.
Yeah, and the broken promises.
Makes sense.
They're looking for something different.
Yeah, they want change.
Something radical, disruptive.
And Georgescu represents that.
Exactly. They also talk about the influence of misinformation.
Oh, yeah, that's everywhere.
And propaganda, which is something we're all dealing with.
Totally.
And they even suggest that some of this misinformation might be coming from outside forces.
That's scary.
It really makes you think about how fragile democracies can be.
For sure.
And how easily things can be manipulated.
Yeah, by people who want to cause chaos.
Right. And it's not just external forces. They talk about how socioeconomic factors play a role too.
Like what?
Like people struggling financially,
Right.
feeling left behind,
Yeah.
and they're looking for someone to blame.
They want someone to fight for them.
Exactly. And Georgescu seems to tap into that.
Wow, it's really complicated.
It is, and it shows the challenges democracies are facing.
All over the world.
But then Schimnicul and Porifogenetul go even deeper.
Deeper.
They start talking about NATO's future.
Okay.
And specifically these rumors about U.S. troops leaving Eastern Europe.
Oh, wow.
You can imagine how that would make people feel.
Anxious.
Yeah, anxious, uncertain.
Right.
Especially because there's not a lot of transparency.
Around these decisions?
Right. And we're talking about countries like Romania. They rely heavily on NATO for their security.
I see.
They even mentioned this alleged ultimatum given to Romania
Oh, what?
about their stance on the Ukraine war,
Really?
with potential consequences if they don't comply.
Wow, that's serious.
This isn't just a story.
Right.
These are real anxieties playing out on a global stage.
It feels like the stakes are really high.
They are. And what Schimnicul and Porifogenetul are getting at is the vulnerability of countries caught in these power struggles.
Right.
They talk about how important NATO is for keeping things stable in Europe.
Yeah.
And they don't shy away from what could happen if the U.S. pulls back.
That's a scary thought.
It is. It's like the ground is shifting, and we don't know what's coming next.
I know what you mean.
They do mention the idea of a European army as a possible alternative, but even that comes with its own challenges.
Yeah, for sure.
It's like a reminder that the world is always changing.
Constantly in flux.
Yeah, and the things we used to rely on aren't guaranteed anymore.
That's true.
So we've got this rising right-wing sentiment, potential instability in Europe, and these global power struggles. It's a lot. What really stood out to you from what Schimnicul and Porifogenetul were talking about?
I think what hit me the most was how they talked about individual action. Like, even with these huge global problems, we still have a responsibility to stay informed, to have real conversations, and to expect more from our leaders.
I agree with that. It's easy to just feel helpless when you see all this stuff happening. The political turmoil, the economy, the conflicts. But Schimnicul and Porifogenetul, they're saying don't give up. Like, even if it feels like everything is falling apart, your voice matters. What you do matters. Even the small things.
Yeah, they're saying we can make a difference.
Right.
They paint this picture of a world that's like teetering on the edge, but also full of possibilities.
Like a crossroads.
Yeah.
And they're saying the future isn't set in stone.
We get to choose.
It's what we make it.
By the choices we make, the way we engage with things, and how we build connections instead of walls.
So as you go about your day, think about what we talked about. How these global things are showing up in your own life, in your community. Ask yourself, what can I do to make things better? How can I encourage people to understand each other? How can I support good leaders? How can I contribute to a fairer world?
It all comes down to us. We decide what kind of world we want, and then we have to work to make it happen.
That's a great point to end on. It's been a fascinating look at the state of the world and some food for thought as we navigate these uncertain times.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us.